Okay, so can everyone hear me if I don't use the microphone? Is that all right at the back? You can hear okay? Yep, excellent. I don't really like mics. Okay, so what I thought I'd do first of all is just establish a bit of credibility, because this area, there's so many narratives in it that contradict each other. You know, once you start looking into the ufology through different angles, you can hear one story and the next story is in total contradiction to that whole story. So the bottom line is it's up to you to work out what holds truth for you. But as we know with what we're going through right now, I mean, if you spent all your time right now trying to work out what's true and what's not, you probably wouldn't get anything done. So, you know, let's just have some stories. Let's just follow a few narratives and just use this, if anything else, to examine how you feel when you hear these narratives. Because believe it or not, we've got many aliens here today. If you haven't got Indigenous blood in you, you're not from here, basically. That's the bottom line. So here we are, a group of aliens all sitting together, talking about us. I mean, that's got to resonate with someone, but because there's so many different races, which one are you resonating with? Okay, and so just to back up a bit, the reason why I say Indigenous belong here is I've spent a lot of time in spirituality, a lot of time in India, a lot of time in Thailand, and a lot of time meditating and spending a lot of time on different planes other than this plane before I came to ufology and extra-dimensional beings. And so within that time, I did a lot of channeling work. I used to work as a tarot reader for over 20 years. I did lots of psychic work with different people, past life regressions. That all ended with COVID. You know, I'm on a new chapter now. Who knows what's coming next? But I'll get my orders when they tell me. But for what I'm establishing is that I've done a lot of psychic work, and I'm going to make sure I define which of the things I'm sharing with you has come through channel versus research. And so I'll start with the channel work. And going back about 5-6 years before Cyclone Debbie, I was in Thailand. I used to go to a tantric yoga school there a lot, you know, every year, and just work on my yoga. And so during that time, I was just like really high frequency, you know, meditating every day, doing my asanas, just really tuned in. And over that time, the Tibetan Buddhists have this really nice meditation, which is a great tool to use, called the analytical meditation. And in the analytical meditation, you analyze something. For half an hour a day, I used to do it. Just for half an hour, you get somewhere comfortable, you close your eyes and you analyse it. So you might, even with something like selling a house or buying a car, or those little decisions we have to make, which lately seem like such big decisions, not knowing the economic climate. And so in this meditation, I did it for 21 days, and I decided to look at who am I? You know, because I've been teaching in festivals all through Queensland and other parts of Australia for years. But who am I? Apart from that, apart from being a mum of 4 kids, you know, living in a community down in Airlie Beach, you know, who else am I? And so for 21 days, for half an hour a day, I just analysed who I was. And I think it was by about day 18, I was all these different, whatever you want to call them, were giving me all this information about who I was. And one particular day, they said, oh, you're Arcturian. And I was like, oh yeah, here we go. Ego's jumped in. You know, I've been meditating for 18 days and my ego's jumped in, which is always the first thought when you know, something comes to you from elsewhere, is, oh yeah, that's my ego playing with me. You know, and so I was like, yeah, whatever. And I said, all right, well, tell me more about it. Because believe it or not, I'm the biggest skeptic. I've got a scientific mind and I'm a skeptic. I never chose to read tarot cards. It chose me. I continuously tried not to do it. I continuously got called to do it. Okay, so I'm a bit of a paradox in that way, that I didn't start off as a spiritual being. I started off as on the ground humanite. And so anyway, I said, all right, well, tell me more about these Arcturians. And they said, okay, well, you've got the ability to manipulate other people's minds. And I'm like, oh, hang on here. You know, I've heard of these reptilians and all these greys and that. Maybe this is something like to do with that. And I said, oh yeah. Well, and they said, no, don't get us wrong. Don't stop listening just because you've judged. You know, and they said, okay, that's one of our things. I said, oh, what else? And they said, well, we're major geneticists. You know, we came to Earth very early on in its history. And we're geneticists in putting different genetics together, you know, to form beings and adjusting the genetics of beings for good. And so what they were able to tell me is that they were very high beings and everything they did was for the highest good. And in this channel, once I got over my ego, getting caught up in it and was able to go more purely into it, it was beautiful. It was just the most blissful feeling while we were communicating. And they told me a few other things, like I asked them how do they transport back and forth from the Boots galaxy. And they said, well, we travel through crystalline caves. And so I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. And then a couple of years after that, and I just left it, wrote it all down in my journal, you know, and then a couple of years later, I've actually got my book with me, which I've written, which tells a bit more about the channel and what happened, you know. And so in my book, it explores further into the brief information I'm giving you now. But a few years later, I thought, well, I've got to get this book edited. You know, I've had it sitting there. If any writers out there, you know, you've got these books written and actually getting them edited and getting them published is a whole other story. So I'm in Thailand riding along on my motorbike and there's a chick putting her thumb out to get picked up. And I'm like, oh, hello here. And I pulled over. You know how sometimes your body makes you do something? You don't plan to do it. You know, and all of a sudden you're in this situation. It's like you're watching yourself play out the human life, you know. And all of a sudden I'm giving this hitchhiker, big girl, on this little motorbike, a lift into town. And she said, oh, how you going and all that? And I, yeah, I've got this book I've got to edit. Oh, I'm an editor. Oh, what sort of books are you editing? Oh, spiritual real life books. Oh, great. I also do past life regression. Would you like a regression? Great. You know, I told her about my experience a few years before. No, at that stage, I knew nothing about Arcturus. It wasn't in my scope of interest. So I hadn't even looked it up. I'd written it down. If you'd asked me then what the name of these people were, I couldn't have told you. It was written down somewhere where I'd written it. And anyway, so she takes me into this past life regression. And in this past life regression, what you'll know, if anyone's ever had a past life regression or would like one day, you actually go through a whole lifespan of a particular life that's pertinent to your situation at that moment that you're looking into. And so you go all the way to death and then you go just past death. And that's where the interesting stuff happens. And so in that life, when I died, I actually travelled back to Arcturus. I didn't know at the time because I hadn't put all these puzzle pieces together. But how it appeared was that when I arrived, it was bright white. If you can imagine, there's no form and there's no colour. It just is, but you know that there's form, if that makes sense. So you're in this really white place, and to greet me was this lady, and she was surrounded by these children, and everyone was in white, but I could just make out features of faces and limbs and everything. And the brilliance was, I was trying to think of how to explain it to you guys today, but if anyone's ever done a lot of meditation and reached samadhi, it's the same as that. You go into this place of everything and nothing at one moment, but there's no words to explain the feeling of it. And so I actually got there, and because I've done lots of channeling and meditating, I was able to have a look around. You know, I didn't go, whoa, and pull out. And so I had a look around this planet, and it was all white, but as I became more attuned to the frequency, I could start to feel form, if that makes sense. It wasn't a seeing place. It wasn't a place where you use visuals. In this world, we use a lot of visual. You know, and anyone that's ever had eye problems will notice how alert our other senses can be when we stop looking. But for us, we tend to do a lot of our work through visual experience. So in the Arcturian, in the Boots galaxy, it was very much you felt the form. You could feel, it was like you were one with every little molecule on that planet, if it makes sense. You know, and that was my channeled experience that I had in the Arcturian field. And so a few years later, I'm like, you know, thinking, oh, I should put all this together, you know, and document it. And that's when I went back and looked up this word Arcturian and went on to Google. And back then, Google wasn't as heavily censored as it is now, so you could actually find something. And I found out all this information, and it correlated with everything I'd written down. And so for me, that being a skeptic, that was enough to say there's something in this. Okay, and so that was Arcturus, and at the time, they told me that's where I came from, and since then I've found that we can be blends. We're not necessarily one race. Okay, there's over 8, and anything I'm going to tell you from here on, or anything I'm speaking out of my mouth, is only based on what I've researched, I've experienced in this moment. Okay, so be as critical as you want. And, I encourage you to be critical. Okay, and so what I've found through the research is that there's 84 different races of extraterrestrial beings living on this earth. So if we had 84 people here representing each one of them, and we're going to do a workshop tomorrow on this, where you'll get to experience being one of those groups. How would you be looking at the world? If you were made up of one of those 84 races, how is it that you're going to be perceiving this COVID? How is it you're going to be perceiving nature? How is it you're going to be perceiving the weather patterns going on now? We're all so different, and that's beautiful. And yet so much in our society we try to be the same. Okay, and so 84 different groups. The first ones I came across when I was getting ready for this festival, because I didn't know what you guys know. And I've felt into what you know, and there's a lot of highly experienced people here. So forgive me if what I'm saying doesn't fit with your narrative. Whatever. Just think about something else when I'm talking about it, And so the ant people really fascinated me, because the ant people were on this earth. I think they come from the Orion belt, and they were quite benevolent. You'll hear the words benevolent and malevolent. I can never say it properly. Benevolent means that they're here for our good. They're in the positive energy. Malevolent, as we know about the reptilians, are more there for their needs. It can be quite negative for us. Now, what we've got to remember is that Earth is a place of duality. Good and bad, black and white, hot and cold. This is the essence of the elements of this earth that we're on. And so we can't have benevolent without malevolent. It doesn't balance. If you look into the Vedic teachings of yoga, they go further into this. You can't have one without the other, which is why we continuously experience karma. We do something, then it happens to us, just in different time frames. And so the ant people came to this earth, and they were benevolent. They were here for the good and will of earth. And what they actually did with the Palladians is that they created the indigenous people. Now, keeping in mind, going back to my earlier narrative, in channeling, I was told in this 21-day meditation that the indigenous of this world and dogs are the only natural inhabitants of this earth. Okay, and here this narrative is saying that the ant people and the Palladians together created the first indigenous person. And guess where that was? Right here in Australia, the oldest living earth on this planet. The first mob to come was here in Australia, the Aboriginal people, is this narrative. Now what happened is later on, and I'll get more into the reptilians after, but the reptilians came, and to cut a long story short, they had a big fight and everything, or they wanted to have a big fight, the reptilians, and the ant people said, we're not into killing and war and all that, we'll just leave you to it. So they went underground and also set up a station in the moon. In the hollow part of the moon, you can still find ant people today. And I'm going to sidetrack a lot because there's so much information here. If at any time you want more clarity, just throw your hand up and I'll get to you. Okay? So the ant people just left everyone to it. They'd created the indigenous person. And when you meet people who there's not a lot of people who are fully indigenous interacting with other people out there right now. So the chances are for us lot sitting here to cross paths with a fully indigenous person is probably limited. Okay, so people with indigenous blood going through their DNA, indigenous DNA in their body, have got memory of the beginning of their time through the ant people. Okay, so if you've got any indigenous blood in your genetics, you're related to the ant people, benevolent group. Okay, Now where are we going to go from here? All right, the carrions. Oh, I'll finish with Arcturians. Sorry, I've got so many notes, so I don't want to bore you. So just yawn if you're getting bored, and then I'll change tact. Okay, so the Arcturians. When I actually researched this material, they were saying that they don't need their senses to actually feel or be or anything. They've gone beyond that. Yeah, they use telepathy, and you'll find most of the extraterrestrial groups use telepathy. Anyone that's strongly in their feminine energy may be finding that they're using a lot more telepathy in their everyday life now. If you're in a couple that you've been in for a long time, you naturally do it anyway. With our children, we naturally use telepathy, except for when we're not listening as adults. Okay, the thing that I found interesting about the Arcturians in the research was that they all look the same. I thought that was fascinating that they all look the same. So how do they tell the difference? Well, they don't need to. They're one of the highest frequency groups that we come in contact with on this earth. So it doesn't matter how others see them. Everything they do is for everyone. It's not about their single purpose. You know, they're here to serve. They only sleep once a week. Can you imagine that? Just sleeping once a week. And they live up to 1,000 years old. 400 to 1,000. But the reason why they die, and I'll say a bit more about dying in a minute, the reason they transcend this earth and stop being here, die, is because they've fulfilled the contract that they came to do. So they make a soul contract. Once that's done, they pass over into another dimensional field. And so with dying, in our dense earthly 3D being, we tend to think of that as that's the end of everything. Or if we've got religious beliefs, we might believe we go to, Allah or, wherever, heaven, hell, all these different narratives we've heard. What I've learnt through the ET research is that we live in a multi-dimensional field. Okay, so we've got our universe, and because we're looking through dualistic binoculars, we see physical planets out there. Okay, we see Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, some of them stronger than others we can see, and we conceptualize it in a dualistic way. That's our way of understanding and interpreting situations. But what happens with the multidimensional field is that on each layer, there's a different narrative. But on each layer, you might need different glasses to see it, if that makes sense. And so the more you meditate, the more you spend in higher frequency, the more layers become apparent. Okay, now an example I can give you for this is when I was driving up from Airlie Beach. We're driving along just outside of Bowen, and all of a sudden, the whole of my left vision all went into crystalline. It was like I was looking at a different frequency. I could still see in front, and the body was still driving, but there was another frequency, another dimension that I was actually able to filter into. I nearly stopped and asked my mate to drive because I wanted to get into it. But, I'm hopeless at driving. Once I start, I don't want to stop. I can't get myself out of the wheel, to get there. And so that's between the fields. You might be finding in your dreams, you're starting to see other frequencies, other dimensions. Okay, and when we were kids, if we said any of this, they would have said we were in the loony, send us to the loony bin. Even now in some crowds, if I started telling all the people what I'm saying now, they'd be going, oh, maybe lock her up, better keep her off the streets. But the veil is getting very thin. It's getting very easy to see between if you allow yourself. And that's the difference. It's all there. I don't know, did anyone come last night to see the stars? Anyone come? Okay, well, I saw UFO last night. It was amazing. There was this fella talking about, he was questioning the speaker, and the speaker had beautifully presented his experience and spoke really well. And this guy was giving him a bit of a hard time, questioning everything and all little details. And then all of a sudden, this bright light shone really bright in the sky and then went off again. And it was like in answer to this young fella's questioning of this person's experience. I was like, And what they say is that we'll only see what we see when we're ready to see it, if we need to see it. And so it's all out there. It's just a matter of you being open to seeing it. But then you've got your own flavour. You know, what are you going to be looking at? Are you going to be looking at the Pleiades? Are you going to be looking towards the Boots galaxy, at the Arcturians? Are you going to be looking at the Sirians, the Orion belt? Where are you attracted to? So after this weekend, when you're out there, feel where you're attracted to in the sky and look into it. You might be quite surprised what you actually see. Okay. Arcturians can use invisibility, and I use it a fair bit. It's pretty good with the police, not that I drink or anything, but I just can't be bothered getting stopped all the time. And so, you can throw your invisibility cloak over and no one can see you, which is great, except for one time I forgot to take it off. I'd come back from Thailand, and this is after Cyclone Debbie, and there'd been a lot of stuff happening, with the ending and beginning of something. And I had my cloak still on, and I'm walking in the markets, and this magpie just flew straight into my head, and it fell on the ground. It looked at me, and I looked at it like, what? And I'm like, sorry. And then he got up and left, and these people had seen it. They were looking like, what's going on? And then I remembered to take it off. So, if you've got Arcturian in you, you can use these gifts. And this is where we're coming to, is that we've got all these gifts. We only use 10% of our information that our DNA provides for us. We're on that dimension. But everyone here has the ability to access other gifts. But who are you? What gifts are available in your DNA? Well, that's up to you guys to find out. So I noticed that the festival was about UFOs, and I don't want to get so caught in the ET. I want to look at the vehicles as well. And what I learned years ago in research, I listened to Veritas Radio a lot, and that's an alternative radio station that's based on ufology. They've got a bit caught up in the COVID stuff recently, as a lot of people have, but they're primarily ufologists. And this is a fella in America, and he interviews, the likes of David Icke, Michael Tsarian, people right up there in their field. And he's got some great information on there. So when I was researching one of his speakers, they were talking about the multi-realm commandership. I mean, I love the words, hey? And so this multi-realm commandership is this actual group of a race of beings that live on this ship. Okay, and they're on every dimension at the same time. So it's not a physical ship, or is it? Maybe when it's in our dimension, it's physical. And maybe that's some of the ships that people were talking about before, But from what I've understood from other research is that they say most of the physical ships you see, like the metal and, the physical ones, are made by the government. And they're often around military areas, Townsville. Okay, so what they've done is they used to, back in the 40s, when the multi-realm commandership came, one of their ships was brought down by radars. And then what the American people in that group that was studying them did was that they reverse engineered these ships to the level that they could use them themselves. Area 51, if you've looked into anything like around there, the Roswell crashes, any of that, will give you more information about this. You might not be able to get it on Google anymore, but DuckDuckGo is a great search engine. Rumble is a great search engine. YouTube is getting really censored now, so you probably won't find so much information on there anymore either. But if you go to DuckDuckGo, veritasradio.com, Rumble, they're all really good ways of accessing this information. So anyway, the multi-realm commandership came in the 40s to Australia, to the world, to the Earth. They hadn't been here before. But what happened was that was the time the atomic bombs were let off. And they came with a message and they said, you guys, when you let your bombs off, that caused a ricochet in the universe through the dimensions. Remember, it doesn't have to be physical. There's an energy that happens when a bomb goes off. And so those bombs affected everyone. And so the multi-realm commandership, part of their job is to bring all the dimensions into one. That's their purpose. And so they came to this planet And they're saying, nah, you won't be allowed to do that again. You know, we let you go this time, free will and all that, universal free will. Next time, nah, it's not happening. And so they travel with thought. They use light to travel. And I don't know if anyone's read the Cedar series about Anastasia in Siberia. If you haven't, they're amazing books. They're written by a Russian scientist, boat sailor guy. And what he did was he met this woman in the forests of Siberia. And she was living in this cold country with no clothes on. She lived with the bears and the animals, and they brought food to her and kept her warm at night. And she brought children up in this environment. And her whole family travelled around with white light shining, a ball of white light shining above them. And any time they needed to dematerialise their body and go somewhere and rematerialise it somewhere, they would go back into that light, travel to where they needed to, boom, there they are in physical field again. So when I read that, I was thinking, I wonder if she's linked in with that group. You know, they're hundreds of years old, this Anastasia and her family. You know, and so it's quite interesting that the UFOs aren't always physical things. Thought is, if you look at all the different ETs, thought continuously comes into their method of travel. Okay, and so that got me thinking, all right, if we're all part extraterrestrial, how can my thought affect my life? And so the other day I was having allergies. You know, we're getting upgraded right now, big time. And so I was having allergies, and it was night time, and I don't want to get up and find the antihistamines and blah, blah, blah. And so I thought, all right, well, these ETs are all saying that thought creates. So I said, okay, my nostrils are clean and feel great. And I just kept on saying this mantra, and within, I think it was only about 2 minutes, it all gone. I thought, right, okay, we've got the power to create. That's amazing. Okay, and because so many of these extraterrestrials have this use of the thought, I thought, well, I can't go wrong. I know I've got Arcturian in there. Who knows what else? Okay, so the only other thing I want to say with the multi-realm commandership is that they're all aligned to God consciousness. Now, this was interesting because when you hear the word God, well, then you go religion, you know, and then you can get caught up in the whole chaos of it all. And I thought, okay, well, what have they got to say about, you know, God consciousness? And when I looked into lots of different ETs, the common thing that came up was that they saw spirituality as being the super glue of the universe. That's what connects everything. When I looked into other UFOs and how they worked, they said that the consciousness affects the travel of the spacecraft. So it's a major element in all of this travel craft. And as I'll come to later, there's one travel craft where they drop a sensor into the they connect with the DNA of the commander of the ship. And that's how he drives it, is from his DNA, which is so different to, you know, some of this stuff is hard to hold. All right, so yeah, any questions about so far, multi-realm? All good? Okay, so the Carrions, now they were interesting because the Carrions are the ones that seeded, one narrative says that they seeded the Reptillians. Okay, so the Reptillians look up to the Carrions. They're gods, you know, who they show great respect to. And the Carrions are neutral. They're not benevolent, they're not malevolent. They're just neutral. Okay, they came to lend consciousness to bring Earth's frequency up. That was the reason they came to this Earth so long ago. You know, back with the ant people and the Palladians and all of these others. They came a long, long time ago. And they're bird-like in appearance. Now, one of my channels I did, I actually had a DMT experience. I've only touched the medicine twice. And it was at one time when I was going through chaos. And it was at the beginning of COVID. That was when it was. And I was saying, all right, well, because I'm here to serve. I'm not here for me. I know I'm here to serve. And I said, oh, how am I going to support all these people in fear right now? We're in this lockdown and these poor older people are getting scared and they're stuck in their apartments in the cities and they're getting told that they're the one that are getting targeted with this virus. I was like, well, how can we help these people? And I was feeling really sad about it all. And so a friend came and he had some DMT and he said, here, black wattle seed. Would you like to take a spiritual journey and find the answer to your question? I said, I'd love to. And so I had my journey, and nothing really came in the journey. I'm like, I still don't get it, and I'm still feeling really sad for everyone. And then I started writing, and what Cheryl was saying earlier, I just started writing. I wrote probably about 20 pages non-stop. And afterwards I read it, and they said the birds are the ones that hold the layers. The reptiles, as in the lizards and snakes, are our protectors, which I found interesting because everything I knew about reptilians was reptiles. They're going to suck our energy, you know. And so I've watched the birds and the lizards since. And I've noticed, the birds are able to travel in those different layers, aren't they? Have you ever imagined flying through a forest? Have you ever watched them, the way they fly through? And if anyone's ever done paragliding or anything, how hard it is when you land, and yet they land on these little sticks. So, and then I watched all the lizards because I lived mostly outside, and I noticed, they're always surrounding me. They're always like, but I don't feel any draining energy by them being there. So I found that quite interesting. So when I came across in the carrions that they were bird-like, they're a few inches to 2 feet tall. So does that mean all these birds on this layer aren't from here? I mean, in my channel, they're not. They're from the carrion world. And maybe all the insects are not from here either. Okay, so they have really sharp intuition, and they have self-realization, which is the ultimate. But they're very Saturnian in that they're very organised, they like neat appearance, and they're very in touch with how others see them. I suppose being that intuitive, you'd pick up if someone's going, oh, you're looking a bit drab today. It'd be like, oh, yeah, in your face. And so they taught the reptilians that all on this planet was theirs. They taught them when they designed the reptilians, they made them from their own DNA and the reptile. They joined it together. As you'll find with all these ETs, it's DNAs mixed together that make these beings. So they made these reptilians, and they taught them this world was theirs to take, which kind of sounds weird off a neutral, not malevolent, not benevolent, but they've created this malevolent race, which I found quite interesting. They also made the blue aliens, but we don't see the blue aliens here in our galaxy. You will hear a lot about blue-green aliens. The Pleiades are often presented that way. Again, in all my ET research, blue-green continues to come up. I wonder whether in this field we can see different colours through the duality and the minerals we have on this planet, but when we're looking at other dimensional fields, it looks blue-green to us. And the only reason I question that is the whiteness I saw in channel when I went to Arcturus. So I wonder whether what we call blue-green is our inability to see beyond that. And so we perceive it as blue-green or grey. And so the carrions come from the Orion's belt. So if you're looking up in the sky and you're really attracted to Orion, maybe you got a bit of carrion in there. Okay, look into it yourself. They were the first sentient species born into this universe that we find ourselves in. So they were the first ones who were able to feel, which I found it interesting that then they produce the reptilians who feed off dark energy. So, need to do more research if it interests you. So, yeah, all good? You're still with me? Yeah, cool. Okay. So now we're going to go a bit down the dark edge and look at the Anunnaki and the reptilians. I mean, I find these guys fascinated. If you easily fall into fear, probably a good time not to listen. But it's all one. Without darkness, we can't have lightness. Like Great Spirit told me probably about 8 years ago when they showed what was going to happen now. They showed that we're going through this transcension. And as the light comes up, we have to have the dark in equality to it because we're in a dualistic environment, okay? And so every time the light comes up higher, the dark has to match it. Now, for those who have learnt to embrace the dark, you'll find that it's quite interesting and doesn't have to be a battleground. It's your interpretation of it that makes it that. Okay, so I'll just leave it there. So close your ears if you don't like scary stuff. Okay, so the Anunnaki. So we'll go to the Nephilims. And this was interesting. If you go onto Rumble, there's a site on there called Cryptic Chronicles. And the fella there presents so many different extraterrestrial races, quite in an interesting way. You know, sometimes you listen to people and it's like, I can't stay awake, you know. But he's quite cool. And he's got this 6-part series about the Nephilim. And I know I'm not saying it right, but I'm doing my best. I'll call them the Ents because I've struggled with pronunciation. So the Ents came to this earth, okay? And they were needing for their planet, and one of the narratives says that their planet was Nibiru. And anyone that's heard of Planet X or Nibiru, that comes into our orbit every 3,600 years. Forgive me if I got the numbers wrong. You know, do your own research, of course. And when their planet came closer to the Earth, they found that Earth had gold, which they needed to replenish their planet because their planet was dying. Okay, it needed shielding. They were living underground there. So they came to Earth, as they've done to many other planets, to mine the gold. And they produced the Anunnaki. And so they had the Anunnaki in the Persian Gulf, lots of gold. They had them mining for gold there. They had them mining in Eastern Africa. Now, the Anunnaki in the Eastern Africa, and this is the narrative, was going, well, look at those dudes in the Persian Gulf. They got good conditions. You know, they got these beautiful palaces, lovely food, water, great conditions. And look at us, we're in the ground, you know, in the mud, getting crap food, you know, blah, blah, blah. I'm just making this up. But they weren't happy with their conditions. And so they said, oh, why do we have to do this? Because they did this for thousands of years, mining this gold, taking it to their planet and using it as a shield because they destroyed the planet. Or maybe it destroyed itself, who knows. Anyway, and so they said, all right, well, we'll make some humanoids for you. They can be the slave race. And so they mixed the DNA to form the first slave human. And they say they mixed them with the Sumerians. Hence the Sumerian tablets. Anyone that's looked into Sumerian tablets, that'll tell you this whole story. That's where you'll find the credibility behind this story. It's all written about the Anunnaki, the Ents coming, making the Anunnaki, and then them making the humanoids to do the mining of the gold for them. Okay, and so that was all written in clay and lasted, you know, for a long time. So in this narrative, the Sumerians were the first humans to be made on this earth, not the Aboriginal people. That's that narrative. So if we're looking at a multi-dimensional field, well, it's possible that both are the same narrative. Who says one has to be right, one has to be wrong? You know, every time we go there, like with this COVID stuff, we hit brick walls. You know, so let's let go of what's true and just say there's many narratives. Okay, and so this is what I found interesting. You know how you hear people saying, oh, they've got entities in them? And anyone that's looked into healing, Stephen Richards is an amazing Aboriginal healer who goes in and takes you into a different dimension to release you of the entities that have joined you in your being. Okay, and they say that the Anunnaki are one of the races that will jump in to alcoholics, drug addicts, and take over their body. We've got to remember that in this universe, the law is free will. So that means those people have given their power over to allow them to come through the gap in their aura at that time. Okay, and so you'll find if you've ever worked with alcoholics or drug addiction, you'll find that the people often have many layers. And as those layers are cleansed, you can get closer to the soul. Okay, so the Anunnaki, they've been coming to the earth for 445,000 years. So work that one out. Who was the first one here? Where do we start and stop? They've got really high technology. I'm just scanning to see what we haven't touched. Most of them actually, they did replenish their planet. Now this is where the narrative differs. One narrative says that with the gold, they did replenish their planet, and most of the Anunnaki moved back onto their planet when it came into orbit again. Once it went out of orbit, the ones that were left were stuck here. Well, guess what? That's now. And guess what? Nibiru's coming. Okay, and so one of the potential possible narratives of what we're going through now with this COVID narrative is that these guys, the Anunnaki, who are attached with the reptilians or one with the reptilians, need dark energy, interpret that as you will, to feed. That's their food. Just like we need, bread and water and greens and all these things to feed, they need fear, they need pain, they need all these things to feed. Their planet is on the way back. They don't actually want to be here. Their planet is okay for them to live on, but they didn't all jump on last time it came into our orbit. So they've got this opportunity again to jump back onto their planet. But guess what? They stopped ascending. Because the ones that didn't have enough humanoid in them didn't have the possibility to keep ascending. The reptilians and the Anunnaki without enough human DNA could no longer ascend. They lived for hundreds, thousands of years. So they've been stuck here, not being able to ascend onto a different dimension, waiting for their planet to come back. But they're a bit low in energy. We didn't have enough fear lately. I mean, if you look at before COVID, when I look at it, I see us as a race as like spoilt little brats. No disrespect to the people doing it hard, but a lot of us had it pretty good. I know me, I was going to India and Thailand once a year. That's not even heard of now. But we did have it pretty good compared to back in the 50s and 60s where it was harder to get by. You didn't have these, the automatic everything wasn't so prevalent. So the last 20, 30 years before COVID has been quite lovely. We've been in a lot of abundance. And so anyway, going back to this, these guys needed to up the fear. We were used to watching horror films and, all these things. There wasn't enough fear to feed them. And so one of the narratives is that what's going on right now is to feed them, to get them ready to go back onto their planet. Play with it as you will. Okay. So the Anunnaki and the Nephilim, they knew that last time their planet came, that there was going to be a big flood. Because every time their planet came close to Earth, it caused the tectonic plates at each poles to move. And what resulted out of that was that there were big floods. And that's happened every single time their planets come close. It's actually documented in the Sumerian tablets, so you can see for yourself. And so the actual Bible comes into this narrative with these dudes, because this is where they say they told Noah that the big floods were coming because they knew their planet was coming back and that he needed to get all these animals together. And the way that in this Cryptic Chronicles this guy explains it is he says they didn't take all the animals on there. What did they take? The DNA on the ship so they could reproduce it. Because these people have got such high or these races I should say, have such high technology. They don't need all this physical matter. If we were a group of ETs, which we are, sitting here right now, we wouldn't be looking the way we are in our true form. And this is another exercise some of you more advanced people out there can try, is look into the mirror and ask to be shown your true reflection. Just like with meditation, the first time you do it, you're not going to get it. Take some time, keep practicing, and you'll be amazed what you see. Okay, it won't happen all at once unless you're I think it's a grey. Grey can shapeshift like that. Palladians, shapeshift like that. Arcturians, shapeshift like that. But a lot of the other races, it will happen a bit slower. But have a look at yourself and see what you see. Okay, with the Anunnaki, 3,600 of one of their years is equal to 1 human year. So you can see the difference that we're dealing with here. One of the things that I did further research into Nibiru coming closer, and what they say is that when it comes really close, it causes a nuclear reaction with the tectonic plate movement and all the minerals we have in our Earth and what happens. There was a guy on Veritas Radio about 3 weeks ago talking about the pole shift. And he looked into some research where when the poles shift, what they've found is a lot of volcanoes go off, a lot of earthquakes go off. Same thing when Nibiru comes closer. Okay, and as a result of that, as you can imagine, a lot of volcanoes going off underground, all the water precipitates and creates an ice age because that water's got to go somewhere, creates more ice, and hence comes the ice age. Now, what comes with the pole shift? What comes with the pole shift is some species disappear. Oh, Anunnaki, off they go to their new planet. Other species appear. Oh, these guys from this planet can come in now. Okay, we have, if you've been watching the weather lately, we've been having 2 days northerlies, 2 days southerlies, 2 days northerlies, 2 days southerlies. It's been quite crazy. If you watch the animals, you'll notice that the whales, there was a report not long ago where the whales went up a channel they've never been up before. There's a lot of stuff happening right now. We went out, we've got an eco barge down in Airlie where we go and collect rubbish off the islands. We noticed the tides were early. And we're in the middle of the channel. There's no boats around us, and we got these massive waves come. Where'd they come from? There's a lot of activity going on right now. For those people that live here, you'd be noticing it in the sky. There's lots happening right now. So, any questions so far? All good? Okay. All right, so now let's look at the reptilians. The reptilians are here to serve themselves. Okay, so they feed on the negative energy, and they can be quite aggressive. Okay, with a lot of David Icke and a lot of other researchers will tell you that the Illuminati, the head politicians, all of our leaders are reptilian. The royalty in England. The reason that if we're following this narrative of the extraterrestrials, it may be true, is that they feed off fear. And I don't want to go into the children's stuff, but for those of you that know about and Edo cream or whatever it's called, I don't even like saying the word. All these people have been confirmed to be feeding on it, which kind of confirms that they are in that reptilian belt. Now, the fact that they're so hungry and are having to push to get so much food is a good sign for us. Okay, because obviously they haven't got enough. Okay, so they're quite aggressive. They put human genes in them to try and access a bit more of. At one stage, they wanted to get more into the feeling side. They realised they were lacking the true understanding of the human and the whole experience because they didn't have feeling. So with reptiles, you'll go off into reptarians, and there's all these little subspecies of them. As you can imagine with us as well. You can have an Indian and a Eskimo person have a baby, so then their babies will be a mixture of those genes. That's happened with the reptilians too. They've bred with lots of other different ET groups, bringing out different flavours. And so they've got thought ships as well. Here we go, we're the reptilians. They're the ones where the commander's DNA is clicked into the ship, and he runs it through his DNA. They have 3 different sorts of ships. They use, what's it called? It's a resonance. They feel the resonance of where they are, and then they feel the resonance of where they're going, and through thought form they can travel, through knowing that resonance. Now, anyone that's here that's worked with the esoterics, the great yogis have also taught us how to do this. And if you're going to northern India, there's some yogis up there, and again, it's in my book, a yogi I stayed with, and they're able to travel astrally using this ability of feeling the resonance and then feeling into the other resonance. Okay. They also are able to bend the space-time continuum. So if anyone saw that movie in that cane field where that guy went off to space, Interstellar, it's a great depiction of space-time continuum. It's a great story. It's hard to hold it when he goes into the bending of the time, but it's a great depiction of it. So the reptilians are able to, if I had to get to you, it's going to take me a moment to get there, and there is a space between us. So if we bend that space, then suddenly I'm closer, and I can be there a lot quicker. So they made these tunnels through space, and still do, to be able to get through. And that's the way they travel. And so if you ever go to, like in the Aboriginal spirituality, the mountains hold the law. And if we believe the narrative of the ant people, they would be tuning in with their ant people through the mountains, where the law is held, the caves, to get underground. Mount Shasta in America, massive place for extraterrestrials coming and going. But I'd say because you've got so many sightings here, that these mountains would all have jump spaces where extraterrestrials come in and out. They can also, this one was interesting, some reptilians, commanders, what they do is they drop this sensor into their third eye, and that's how they move their spaceships, through the commander's third eye, and that's how they get about. Now remember that all these spaceships you're not necessarily going to see, okay, because our conceptual ability to see beyond what we know to be true limits us, which is why this is great, this little experiment we're going through right now, because trying to work out what's right and wrong is impossible. What's true and what's false, it's near impossible. So what if we just allow it to be? Then maybe we'll see more. And it doesn't matter what's right or wrong. It's just many narratives. Which one is it for you? Okay. In this narrative that I was looking at, and this was through Veritas Radio, they said that the reptilians actually destroyed Nibiru. And they actually caused it to explode, which had a big effect on the Earth and was one of the cataclysms that wiped out the dinosaurs during that time. So, yeah, the reptilians are heavily involved in the drug industry, the porn industry, fashion, and heavy metal music, which I found interesting. I know some people that like heavy metal music, I can't stand it. But yeah, I do know some people that like it, and they're quite spiritual beings, so I found that interesting anyway. We've all got mixes of who we are. Okay, so we come to the Greys. Now, Judy Carroll, Queenslander, amazing. If you can go on YouTube, she's on YouTube, and what she's had censored there, you can probably get on DuckDuckGo. She is an incredible Zeta Grey, she calls herself, who does a lot of work with the Greys and is able to live on this dimension as well. And a lot of what I'm going to tell you now comes from her, so Judy Carroll. And she's saying that the reptilians have used these machines called programmed life forms, and they're used in my labs to create maximum fear. Now, the reptilians also have the ability to use holograms, to present holograms. Okay, and what her story is that the reptiles have been using holograms to depict the Greys as ones that are going to abduct you and give you a nice little probe that you might not really be wanting at that moment. Okay, and that's all a hologram, but it's not the true Grey. And she speaks about this from experience, being a Grey herself. But listen for yourself to understand the credibility. She said the Greys are actually benevolent and they can ascend. She says that they're very light sensitive. They have gecko, reptilian kind of eyes, and they've got telepathic hypnosis, which makes people comply. Now, the first thing whenever we hear of someone making someone do something is, oh, that's not right. But what she's saying is that they use that to calm people down when they need to be calmed down, so like when they present themselves. So this particular narrative doesn't sit with the narrative of people seeing Greys and going into fear and then going through a horrible experience. You know, do your own research. She said that the Greys came here to use DNA to rehabilitate their own bodies because they'd forgotten how to love. And they needed the human DNA to mix with themselves to remember again how to love. She says she's a Zeta Grey, and they've come to help the planet to adapt their species. Okay, so in each planet, with all the different things going on, you can imagine all the species change. I don't know if after Cyclone Debbie, anyone noticed that there was a few species that appeared for a few days and then were gone again. You know, there were some insects that we'd never seen before, but they were only there for a day or two and then they went again. It was like when all the electricity was turned off, because I was in Airlie, you know, they were able to be seen a lot cleaner than they are normally. But the Zetas, they actually are ecologists. They go to many planets with the aim of balancing the ecology of the planet with what's happening around you. And so there is research out there to say that right now they're shielding the Earth, because one of the things with the pole shift that goes on is that as the physical world doesn't go like that, it's just the poles move. And they're saying that as the poles move, it releases the shield that's around the Earth and allows radiation to come in, and kaboom, that's us done. And that's what's happened in the past, and that's been the cataclysms. If you look down through history, that have resulted in, life being wiped out in one hit that they can't explain. And so they're saying that these greys right now are shielding us from this radiation getting through. But here comes another narrative from the reptiles. The next narrative that you're going to hear from the reptiles is that the ETs are invading. So they're going to, this is a narrative, choose your own belief, they're going to present that what's happening is that we're being invaded. And I kind of think this is possible that they might do it this time. This has been a narrative for a while. Because if you look at the movement of the Army and the Air Force and the Navy right now, it would go in line with that narrative beautifully. It'd be easy for them to say, hey, you know what, guys, we said we were playing war games, but actually we've been protecting you from these aliens. Look, and here's these greys trying to protect us, holding off the radiation from us. We better nuke them. Let's kill them. Let's get rid of them. Because remember, the reptiles can feed off this energy. We're all getting a bit used to COVID now. We're not as scared as we were at the beginning. There's not as much food for them. Oh, yeah, that's a great source of food. And our planet's nearly here. Need to jump on that shortly. And so you can see all these potential narratives, how they could hold substance. Do your own research. The greys, they say, were made from insectoids. And they can shapeshift. And yeah, that's the greys. So I noticed at the back of the awnings there's more information about each of these different races. But yeah, do your own research. So that's the baddies. You can start listening again if anyone was in fear. Okay, but you know what? There's more light on this earth than has ever been recorded. So we are going in the right direction. Yes, it's bringing a lot of negative dramas out in each individual's lives. Things are coming out that we're not expecting and we're having to look at and deal with. But we're just going through a very rapid evolution. You can get caught in the battle with it, or you can just embrace it. I've been telling a lot of our crew, just expect the unexpected for the next 3 years while Uranus and Saturn do their little dance. And with expecting the unexpected, make sure you detach on entry. That's the vital thing. Detach on entry. Because as long as you're attached, you're going to keep on bringing battle into your life and making it harder than it needs to be. So, any questions? All good? Okay, Palladians. All right, the tall people, 7 foot tall. When I was in India a couple of times ago, I was in Hampi, and they have these amazing big temples, and they're made from these big granite blocks, as big as this screen, but, in every direction. And I was hanging out with an Indian guy there who sold tour brochures or something. We used to hang out every afternoon. And I said to him, how did they make these big granite blocks? I mean, you couldn't lift it. And he said, the big tall blue people came. They made them. I'm going, what? And I go, where'd they come from? And he goes, out there. And so I asked a few more Indian people going, oh yeah, what's this? And yeah, they were all like it was, common knowledge. That, and so when I've looked a lot into the spirituality of India, and a lot of their demigods in the Hinduism are blue, tall, and they say a lot of them came from elsewhere, to tell their stories. And so I found that quite an interesting connection with the Palladians. Now, the Aboriginal people and the Maori people from New Zealand have a strong connection. And the Hopi people in India with the Palladians. Palladians are seen as the 7 sisters. If you look into those indigenous groups and their teachings, it's often mentioned about the 7 sisters. And one research said that we're actually the 7th sister, this planet. We're part of the Palladian cluster. And they've actually already started going through the ascension that we're going through now, from into the 4th and then into the 5th. They're a step above us. And so them, as well as the Arcturians, have come, and the Carrions, to help us transform through this. Little bit of distraction with the naughty reptilians on the side trying to suck us dry of energy. But meanwhile, all these other dudes are standing next to us going, come on, you can do it. And we're like, well, what's the secret of getting there? And they're going, well, you've got to empower yourself. You've got to know who you are, believe in yourself, and hold your own power, because you do have free will. So start using it. Stop unconsciously giving it away. I mean, I could get into common law and everything right now, but I won't go that far. Okay, so every 200,000 years, there's a dualistic Palladian born. Okay, and Terron was one of those. And he was able to come, or it was able to come to Earth and spread star seeds everywhere. And so he was able to populate a lot of this Earth with Palladians. Now, anyone that was involved in the December 21st ceremony with Uluru, did anyone get involved in that? Yeah, we did down in our community. That ceremony was in aid of unlocking a box that held a key, and this is all talking in a conceptual way. It wasn't like this, but this is so you can understand it. In unlocking this box with this key that the Palladians had left under Uluru, and which was done, which did happen. You know, the Aboriginal people, the Maori people in New Zealand, the Hopi people in India, in American India, are all interlinked with the Pleiades. Very strong link. Okay. The Palladians, when they come to this earth, have already been every single living thing on this earth. Okay, they've been a rock, they've been the water, they've been the wind, they've been a man, a woman, a baby, a old person. So they're quite high up spiritually. I did question whether the Buddhist lamas might be linked in with the Palladians, because I'm trying to bring it all together with all the other narratives out there in spirituality. And I questioned whether the lamas, come in, because if anyone's ever been to Nepal or Tibet, when you come across a lama, you can't actually stand that close to them. The amount, and I'm talking the Buddhist monk lama, not the animal. Their frequency is so high that you can't actually go that close. You get very sick if you do. And so I question whether they're able to hold their high frequency in this earth doing the service they do. They use jump rooms to travel. So they don't need craft to travel. Okay? And so I questioned Uluru then. I thought, maybe unlocking that box was to do with unlocking a jump room to allow them to come in to assist us through this 3-4 year period we're going through of transformation, of change. And a lot of the work they do here is scientific, and it's learning how to become a human. They've come to teach us how to be human. Okay. All right, so that's all the races but one, the earthling, us sitting here today. Okay, now, hey? Yeah, missed one. I don't know, that's why I was saying if you want to, do you want to present your one? No. Or after, okay. Yeah, so they're the ones I researched. As you can imagine, 84, I just chose a number of them out. Okay, so the earthlings. Some people describe Earth as a prison. I've heard it described as hell by some people, especially recently, but it's actually a school. The narrative that I learned in my research is that this is a school. It's dualistic. We've got all these senses to use. If you look into any of the great spiritual teachings, they'll say to you, send appreciation every day. Be appreciative every single day. The reason behind that is because what we've got here, if we can see beyond our individual selves, is quite extraordinary. We get to taste food. We get to see all these colours. We're having a full physical experience. It's cause and effect. When I do something, something's going to happen in response. It's dualistic. Okay, so what's happened over time is, unfortunately, our egos have taken over our mind. What was once our DNA, our thought form creating, changed over to the ego. Now, my narrative of the ego was that back in time, we needed our ego to survive. Dinosaurs, reptiles, whatever. We needed survival. So we needed to be able to instinctively do something quickly. Now, what's happened over time in our lush life that we've come to live, no disrespect to those who are doing it hard, is that with cars and washing machines and all these things, life's become a bit easier. And so our egos haven't had much to do. And so they've started playing with us. And it only takes 21 days to program a behaviour into us. Okay, so our egos, they've got lots of time with us. They can program all sorts of addictive behaviours, shopping, sex, food, drugs, and then our media, controlled by the reptilians, is able to reinforce that and hold that. And so we're in a school where you could say right now is exam time. Like it's time to get tested to who we really are and what gifts we have. Well, if we just keep going on in our easy non-COVID life, are we really going to push ourselves to do that? Okay, so it's time to take back our minds. One of the ways you could do that, an exercise you could practice, is practice creative thought. The first thing is to become aware that you do have thought, that it's separate to who you are. Or is it? Are you just a thought form existing, then this physical body is taken along for the ride? Well, these are some of the things you could explore for yourself. Okay, so Earth is a great place to make all these different beings. Great place to mix DNA. It's just such a good planet for it. And so they have done lots of making of different races here. I did question with mental health whether mental health is a mix of extraterrestrial beings that shouldn't be mixed together. Whether they're entities that have come in at a time when that person's power's been low or not. I do wonder with that whether it has more to do with it. And that in healings, because you hear of these healers like Stephen Richards, who pull these entities out and put them back in the dimension they were meant to be in, and these people go on to live quite healthy lives, free of the mental health. I had a client probably about 4 years ago, and he came to me with lots of anxiety. He'd be in a room like this, he'd have to know where the exits are, he'd have to position himself in a way that he could get out quickly. And he always reinterpreted everything everyone said as if they were actually going to go in. And so I said, all right, well, let's try it. We'll try the past life regression and see what we can find. We went back to a life where he was a beggar boy in London, back in the cobbled streets and everything. And he was a little kid, stealing stuff on the streets. And this dude, this like pimp kind of dude, took him on. And took him on as his kid and taught him how to do all these bad things and everything. But this guy that took him on wasn't a very nice person. He was using this kid, to get the money and everything, and then he was using it. So he was manipulating his mind. He was playing with him the whole time. And so in this life, he grew up through his teenagehood of second guessing what this guy was wanting out of him all the time. And then when he got older, he actually became this fella, which was an interesting little snag that came out of the regression. Now, when this lad came, he was about 24 when we did this past life regression. When he came out of that aggression, he just felt such shame. He was crying for a couple of days and he just felt so much shame for who he'd been. And then 2 days after that, it all went. And he started going travelling overseas. I seen him a couple of years later. And I said, how's it going? He goes, great. I've just been overseas for a year. I helped out in this voluntary place. I'm working at Bunnings right now. I'm seeing my son regularly and we've got a really good relationship. It all gone. So maybe in mental health and with these things, they can be removed with our, giving our consent. So, okay. They say Earth is the least evolved planet out of all the planets, which is interesting and, makes it a good school, doesn't it? They say there's a Van Allen belt around the Earth that actually keeps the lower beings out. So lower beings than what the lowness of Earth already can't actually come in here, they say. And the solstice, because when I was listening to this interview on Veritas about the Earth, this guy said, well, how come the 25th of December is such an important date for so many different spiritual lines? And he said, because it's next to the solstice. And the solstice is a time in the astral plane where there's an opening and others can enter. So remember, it's not all spaceships. They're entering through jump rooms. They're entering through thoughts. They're entering through DNA. So solstices are good times for other races of our level and up to come in. They say the astral plane is the 4D and it's created from human consciousness. I thought that was interesting. Have you noticed the weather goes really chaotic when there's a lot of fear porn on the media? Start looking at it. When you see the fear porn on Google, because I don't have TV, so I think it's on TV all the time, so you can't really rate it that way. But if you look on Google, when the fear porn comes up on your phone, You know, you got your little thing that says Google, and you go to push on it to check your email or something, they'll come up with a list of different narratives. Right now, I think a lot of it's the Olympics, you know, but when there's a lot of fear porn, like they've just locked down a place or something, the weather in that area will get quite chaotic. I always wonder whether our consciousness creates the weather, you know, and then they're saying this in the astral plane, our consciousness creates that astral plane. There's the etheric plane and then the physical plane. The reason that they see Indigenous as being more open to the higher frequencies, they say, is that they're not as, and I'm saying they, as in a race of people with that DNA, they are not as materialistic as those without Indigenous blood. So in the DNA Indigenous, the Indigenous people with DNA, there isn't a gene in there that's connected with materialism. That's presenting on a scientific layer. On a social level, I don't mean they as everyone who's Aboriginal is the same. So they're saying that Indigenous in the world can have the ability to carry a higher frequency. Who do they hit with the vaccines first? The genetic modifications? The Indigenous. The poor Indigenous, we better look after them. Poor old people. Who's seen the most of history and what's true? Older people. They've seen it. They know what's true and what's not true. As long as they stay off the fear porn and don't get manipulated into thinking something else is true. You know, so who do we hit first? The older people and the Indigenous. And so I won't go too much into the vaccination, but do your own research. Again, you won't find anything on Google. Try as much as you want. If you want to confirm that vaccination is great, just look at Google. Don't go along that narrative, each to your own, you know. But if you want to find the truth of it, go into DuckDuckGo, Rumble, Line, Telegram. There's all these other encrypted internet channels now where you can actually find true information, or is it? Who knows? And they'll give you the breakdown of every single vaccine. Then you can do your own research. You can look at each of those elements and you can see specifically what it does to you. Your decision. You don't have to follow that narrative. Okay. The aim now this was interesting. This researcher said that the aim now is to understand the universe and ourselves in terms of oneness and energy. Okay, so when they looked at God, one of the researchers was saying that extraterrestrial beings see God as the source code, as oneness. And they're saying that with this transformation we're going through now, it's time to remember oneness. Now, COVID's given us that because we've got the ability to come together and talk about a common situation. You know, it's created that belonging for a lot of us where we've been able to come together. You know, so what about if we explore it further into our oneness? And so, yeah, so, you know, I want to leave you on a good note that everything's wonderful. There's a lot of light right now. The Schumann resonance keeps on going through the roof. So there's a lot of amazing good energy. I said to them, well, what's, you know, I've been meditating the last few days and tuning into my guides and saying, oh, I don't want to go and present doom and gloom, you know, what do you reckon? And they said, well, just tell everyone that the antidote to right now is time to wake up. Look in the mirror. See who you are. Be who you are. Good, bad and ugly. There's many of us in here today that have probably got a bit of reptilian in you. How could you not? For, you know, hundreds of thousands of years, how can everyone here not have a touch of reptilian? You know, so chances are you have a little bit of this need to feed off someone else. But you might also have a bit of Arcturian. You might also have a bit of Palladian. You might have a lot of Indigenous DNA. You know, find out who you are. Wake up. Turn the TV off. Whatever you do, unplug the TV. Stop watching it. You know what it's going to say anyway. So you could pretty well write the program yourself. Have a look at research. But if you like the narrative, go with it. It's your own journey, you know, each to their own. They said the key is to understand right now. How do we understand? Well, we research. We feel what's resonating with us, what isn't. Know that we create our own reality. One time I was in India, I was playing with this notion, and I go, rightio, I can create whatever I want. So by the end of today, I'm going to be listening to live music, somewhere comfortable, still be in bed by 8. I like to go to bed early, you know. And so I'm going through the day and nothing's happening, and I forgot all about it. And I'm going back to my guest room where I was staying, and then I hear music, and I'd forgotten all about this creative thought I'd put out there. And all of a sudden, I'm walking towards this music, and these two young girls have hooped their arms under me, and they're all of a sudden walking me into this room, and there's about 100 people. It's like this inner courtyard, and in the building there's all these verandas, and there's all people hanging off them, and there's all these men sitting down in this massive room, probably about 100 people, and then off to the side is the room with all the women in it. And they just plonked me down with the men, because I'm a whitey, you know, so I can't sit with the women. I might say too much, you know. And so they sat me down with the men, and there's 2 bands, and there's about 6 people in each band with the sitars and the drums, and they're playing bhajans. So bhajans are chants, you know, like Om Mani Padme Om, you know. And so they're playing these chants. There's a whole book of chants that they give me. And one band will play the chants, and then the other band will play the chants, and they're building it and building it and building it. So for the next hour and a half, I sat in there, you know, doing the chants with them. And then, you know, when I'd had enough off, I went back to the lodge. And I was like, oh, that's right. That's what I created, you know. And so we do create our own reality. Do we or don't we? Try it. Try something simple. Today, I'm going to drink a yummy drink. Or today, I'm going to meet someone who starts with the name P, with the letter P. Yeah, try it out. Work it out for yourself. Now, one of the other things I looked into were the Akashic records. And one of the researchers was saying that this is a vibrational frequency library. Now, in meditation, in channel, when you reach a level where you can walk into a different dimension and walk into a higher frequency, you can access the Akashic records. Meanwhile, you will hear a lot of channelers talking about what they've learnt through the Akashic records. It documents vibrational frequency. It doesn't document how you're feeling about me saying what I'm saying, but it will document the frequency of this moment. So on that dimension, you can tap into that frequency and be in it and know it. Or maybe you already do know it because you were already in it. And this is where in the multidimensional field, it's all becoming one. We're in one moment at all times. The Akashic records, they say, are in the Pleiades. You know, they're the holders of knowledge up there. Crop circles, I noticed that they've got an art exhibition here with a crop circle. And so I looked into crop circles. And they say that they're educational. They're used as communication, and they're used by many different races to communicate. They're like an energy stamp. And what's been found is that anyone that's ever been physically in a crop circle comes out energetically different. Okay, they're here to assist in our technology because all of the ET races are about bringing the technology up. Okay, they say on Earth we once had high technology and that we're coming back to it again now, and this is this massive shift we're going through right now. Sorry? Yeah, okay, and that's that. We'll just end it at that. So if anyone wants to buy my book, I bring it to sell for my petrol money. And so, because we do this out of love. This is my book. It's about a journey I took through India back in 2013. It was a spiritual journey. I met many masters and slept with yogis in caves and who dematerialized. And anyway, it's all in the book. So if you can come and see me after, I'll be out the back. And I've got some books to show you if you want to know more about where to research. Otherwise, any questions? Otherwise, you can ask me out the back.
Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you.
We're just taking